So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much ripped off from the Odyssey did this seem to you?
It feels like an 11.
Hello, and welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the classics. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married, and we love to talk about books together.
In this podcast, we are reading through the entirety of Virgil's Aeneid, book by book, and this episode in particular will cover book 1.
Yep, the first of 12. So, going off what you just said, maybe it's just because we have just read the Odyssey, and now we're reading the Aeneid, whereas the first time we read the Aeneid, we read it like a good calendar year apart from the Odyssey. But it feels so much like rip-off is a cheap word, right? But it feels like almost like Virgil. It felt to me like the characters' choices and motivations weren't honestly that clear, because it felt like it needed to take a similar like path as the Odyssey. And so like the characters felt like they weren't really like doing their own thing.
It was almost forcing it into the mold unnaturally.
Yeah.
Rather than giving the characters their own motivations.
Yeah, which is honestly why you're going to do the summary of book 1.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't feel very confident giving this summary because as I was reading it, I kind of couldn't really piece together why characters were making the decisions that they were. Like that was kind of hard for me to follow because it felt slightly contrived, because it felt like we like Virgil wanted this book to end with, and now tell us your story, Aeneid, Odysseus. Like it had that same that same build up.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. If you are new to this journey, we have sort of made it a habit of each episode, one of us will give a 60-second speed summary, and the other one will ask a sort of opening question, and we'll rotate who does what book by book. So for this one, I'm going to start with the summary. Bella will ask the question, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1, go.
We open with an invocation to the muse, and we learn that Juno is incredibly angry with Aeneas and the Trojans who escaped from Troy. We get some of the reasoning, and goes to Aeolus, who's the god of the winds, and basically says like, hey, I need you to create a big storm and blow these people off course and kill them all. And Aeolus is like, yep, sure can do. And then he starts doing the storm, and then Neptune is like, hey, this is my domain. Stop intruding on my domain. I'm going to stop this storm, and everybody's going to be okay. So the Trojans, Aeneas and his crew, they all land on shore on this island, and they're going in. They're like, all right, where are we? Aeneas goes into the woods, and he is met by Venus, his mother, who is in disguise, and they sort of have a little exchange. She gives them some history about the island they're on. It turns out it's Carthage, and Dido is queen there. And so eventually they approach the palace. They see, interestingly enough, a bunch of depictions and paintings of scenes from Troy, and then they are welcomed by Dido, and she holds a great feast to welcome them, and basically is like, tell me your story.
That was a very good job.
Thanks.
But there's also details for sure.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of a 66 summaries. We get the main points, and then we flesh them out as we talk.
Yeah. I guess before I do my opening question, 2 things I would add to your summary. One is that there's a conversation between Venus and Jupiter, aka Zeus. It's honestly really hard to switch to the Roman names. Growing up, I got very attached to the Greek names.
Yeah.
Because I tried to read the Percy Jackson series has like the follow-up Roman Gods series.
Yeah.
Where there are both the original Percy Jackson crew, but then there's a whole new crew.
Yeah.
And I remember like I couldn't get through it because I honestly kind of got too confused sometimes. I think I outgrew the series like at the same time I was getting too old.
Yeah.
But I remember reading the first couple ones and being like, this doesn't hit the same.
Just because their names are different?
Yeah, it doesn't hit the same when their names are Roman. That's my personal opinion. Okay, so there is a part where Venus is talking to Jupiter, and she's like, I feel like you've given up on Aeneas and his crew. And he's like, no, it's all going to be fine. And he lays out the sort of prophecy.
Yeah.
Like their destination is super locked in and preordained, and it's going to happen no matter what. Like that kind of vibe. And then the other thing is that Juno at the end of this book cracks a plot to make Dido fall way too in love with Aeneas
Mm-hmm.
while he is visiting. She thinks that Dido is going to like hold them there and not like let them go on their, like fulfill their destiny and keep going on their journey. They're not supposed to stay with Dido.
Mm-hmm.
That's the vibe I got
Yeah.
of that. Yeah. Basically, my opening question has to do with when Aeneas and crew pull up to Dido's palace / the civilization that is being built here. Aeneas is very jealous. How fortunate are those whose walls already rise, he says. And this stood out to me in particular because this feels like a parallel moment to when Odysseus is approaching the palace of the Phaeacians.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, I remember Odysseus being like the descriptions of what he notices when he pulls up to Phaeacia is the people like sort of like how lush the lands are
Mm-hmm.
and how little cultivation needs to be done in order for like all these grapes to grow and for everyone to like live this perfect life. But as Aeneas is approaching Dido's palace, he's just noticing how much like infrastructure, buildings and walls are being made and how like the craftsmanship of these things is very fine, like the handiwork. And so, yeah, basically I wanted to talk thematically about why make such a big fuss out of building things and building a civilization.
Yeah, I think, that ties into, if I had been asking the opening question, I was going to ask about the conversation between Jupiter, Jove, and my version, and Venus, about the sort of fate of these people. Because, yeah, Jove is very clear that they will get to Italy. My translation does your translation just use Italy?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. I think that is a modern sort of retrospective. I don't actually know this for sure, but I don't think in the moment they, like people living in Virgil's time, didn't think of themselves as Italians living in a place called Italy.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I seek out Italy, my country, my ancestors born of Jove.
Right. Yeah. And so there is this very clear sense in which that sort of destination is prophesied and is fated, and everybody else, again, as we saw very often in Homer, is like working around the sort of pillars that are fated. I think that's what's kind of confusing to modern readers, that again was true in Homer and is true here, that it seems like even the gods are beholden to fate in some ways but not in others. So there are some things that must happen, but the way we get to them can change. And so that's where the sort of gods and goddesses are playing around with the mortals' lives as we sort of get from goalpost to goalpost. But yeah, the goalpost of what will become Rome is very set and decreed by Zeus. And so it's interesting how much kind of hope that leaves the reader at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then gives us a point of comparison for everything else, because it's going to be hard to not constantly compare this to the Odyssey, but I think it's worth it, especially in this early part, right? With the Odyssey, we open with Odysseus knowing that he will get home, but also knowing that his entire crew is going to die. And so there will be some semblance of victory in the homecoming, but there will also be a lot of despair prior to that. But here the opening is just much more hopeful. It's just like, we know they're going to get home. And so I read then, when they're sort of beholding Carthage in its sort of early days, there's a almost like, I want that for myself.
Yeah, for sure. Did it feel to you, it's similar to the fate in this is similar to the fate in Homer's epics. Does it feel to you like the end result of the founding of Rome and Italy? Does it feel like so much more certain? Yeah, it has like a stronger feeling of inevitability to it.
Yeah, because if we think about the moments that were fated in Homer, right? We had Achilles with his kind of he had kind of two fates from which he could choose. Either you stay here, you fight, you die, but you win lots of glory, or you go home, you live a long life, but you're pretty anonymous. And that was obviously that was one of the core conflicts for Achilles. And then with Odysseus, as I mentioned, right, we have this idea that if you make it home, you will be able to make it home, but you will have all of the suffering that happens. And so, yeah, there is a clear fate, but for the reader and for Odysseus himself, it's a kind of melancholic, like, oh, there is good, but there is also a lot of pain along the way. Whereas this, I think, yeah, it feels different because it does just seem like, yeah, they will get to Rome or Italy or however we're using the geographic terms, and they will found this new city and everything will be fantastic.
Yeah. At the time that this was written, if you were a modern or a contemporary audience member of this text, you would be, it feels so much more like a thing that actually happened because you're living in Rome or Italy. Like you're there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was even a funny moment. This is in the Ruden translation, which does follow with the Latin lines. This is about line 279. It's in the midst of Zeus's kind of like prophetic declaration to Venus. Zeus, not Zeus, Jove. I'm going to have to, trick myself into readjusting. For them, I will not limit time or space. Their rule will have no end.
Yeah.
So it's even it's not just that they will be successful in founding a city, but the city will reign forever.
Yeah.
Which is very, like, if we're thinking about it, not from our perspective, we in 2026 know that Rome fell, but those living at Virgil's time were like, yeah, we're going to reign the world forever. And there's a funny kind of like arrogance to that I feel like almost any modern society might have of like, well, what could possibly go wrong? Yeah.
My translation says, I give them empire without end, which I thought was,
that's good.
Yeah, I actually quite like this translation. It's got a lot of verve into it. Very Yeah.
The other moment that really stood out to me as well when they were sort of approaching the island and the palace was when they sort of beheld all of these different paintings of different scenes from the Trojan War. Because we don't, I think, know early on, but at the very end of book 1, we find out that at this moment, it has been 7 years since they left Troy. And so, right, we're the in media res in the middle of things. And then Dido is asking, tell me about the story. So we're going to back up and we're going to get those 7 years. But yeah, time has passed enough for word about what happened at Troy to spread and then to be painted and depicted, in places all over. And so what did you think about their reactions to all those scenes?
My translation, as they're looking at the paintings, my translation says, with many tears and sighs, he feeds his soul on what is nothing but a picture. Which, again, I thought that was a banger line. It seems to me to be a strange comparable moment to Odysseus hearing the stories about the Trojan War sung, the story of himself, the story that he's a part of, and then being overwhelmed and crying. But it's interesting that like the Roman version of that, because at this point, they have sort of lost a little bit the oral storytelling element to their culture.
And it's been replaced with like literacy and reading and
And there's a lot of interesting things that can be said about the movement from oral storytelling to the written word, because there are even a lot of people, even of the time, made the argument like we do now, how we talk about how, people don't read anymore. We're so saturated with the image, watching YouTube videos instead of read a book about it, and scroll on TikTok and look at the pictures instead of read the words. But back then, when the movement was being made from oral storytelling to the written word, people had a similar feeling of this is going to degrade our culture and our minds. We're going to become less of a people.
Yeah. And Plato himself was also worried that it would ruin people's memory, that like in an oral tradition, you have to have an incredibly good memory. And now if you can just write something down, well, then you'll forget about it. And so just as we now complain about like attention spans decreasing, Plato was worried about like memory loss and the transition to writing. And yeah.
And like we talk about, the use of the calculator is going to make us worse at doing sums in our head, which it has. I think in my head for sure. But I just thought that was a really interesting thing to notice, that instead of Odysseus hearing the story of himself and crying, it's Aeneas looking at pictures of himself. Like he even said, there's even a moment where he recognizes, he's like, I think that might even be me. He also recognized himself in combat with the Achaean chiefs. And so he sees all the main players and he's like, I think that's me, which is, and then that's like, I just thought that was a really interesting comparable moment that's like different in a very specific way.
Yeah. Right. But it sort of, it taps into, as it does with Odysseus, this sort of sense of nostalgia, right? For Odysseus, the nostalgia that he feels is a nostalgia more for his comrades that at the time when he is in Phaeacia, he has lost and he has hope of getting home. Whereas in a sort of reversal of ways, Aeneas has many of his comrades with him. He's not alone, but his home is what has been taken from him.
Yeah.
Obviously, many, many Trojans died. So some of his comrades, many of his comrades are dead, but he does still have, do we get a number of ships? They definitely have multiple ships of people with them when they land. Yeah. I don't know if we get an exact number, but
I don't remember.
I picture this as a couple hundred people still alive and having escaped.
Yeah, it's definitely it would be like a fleet.
Yeah.
Not just like a collection of ships, but it would be called a fleet for sure. Yeah. It's like that many.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but also I think it's one of the very first lines we get directly from Aeneas is him lamenting the fact that it would have been better if I had died on the battlefield.
Well, that's in the middle of the like thunderstorm that's happening, right? Yeah. They're like, the ship's about to break apart and Aeneas is like, he's mourning that he didn't get to die the glorious death on the battlefield that his comrades, and he's going to end up, just drowning in a shipwreck. And that's pretty a lame way for him to go.
Yeah.
Obviously, then that doesn't happen because, again, the gods in their pettiness are sort of squabbling with one another, and Neptune is stronger than Aeolus, and so he's able to calm the seas.
Yeah, but just an interesting, like that's the first direct line like we get from Aeneas. Blessed were those who died before their father's eyes beneath the walls of Troy, and he goes on to name like specifics.
But I do think that is, yet again, I told myself going into this, I was like, we're not going to spend the whole time just comparing this to Odyssey, and yet this is what we're doing.
It's very Greek. Like I don't know if they had the same exact, like I don't know if the Romans at the time had the same feelings about glory and war. Yeah.
But I was also saying it's also very similar to, in some ways, the first image in the Odyssey that we get of Odysseus, which is not until book 4 in the Odyssey, but that first image we get is Odysseus sitting on Calypso's beach crying.
Yeah.
Not as Christopher Nolan would have you think because he has amnesia, but because he genuinely knows home and wants to get there. Anyway. But yeah, so the first image both of Aeneas and Odysseus is a sort of negative one of them sort of in a state of despair, sadness, lament, and these sorts of things. It's not a sort of very heroic image of them right at the beginning.
Yeah. Though, also like Odysseus, Aeneas goes sort of invisible when they approach Dido and the palace, and he gets, like Odysseus, this grand reveal of I am here and I am hotter than ever.
Yes.
Like it's that also happens, which felt very, very Odyssey.
Right. And it was after a sort of encounter in the woods with a goddess. In this case, it was Venus, who is Aeneas's mother rather than Athena. But it's sort of like the hero goes off into the woods, has a little conversation, and then is like, oh, wait, you're not a stranger. You're a goddess. Yeah. And then that goddess is like, now you are sexy.
Again, like it's so hard to not compare. And it's so hard since you're comparing, or I am as I'm reading, it's so hard for me to actually track what the characters' motivations actually are in the plot.
Well, it was interesting when you told that to me, because I think from my perspective, characters don't really make that many decisions in this first book, right? It sort of opens with them in a storm, which is not under their control, and they think they're about to die. So they're not really making decisions there.
Mm-hmm.
Then the gods intervene and calm the storm, and then they sort of land. And obviously that's sort of the natural consequence of the storm and needing to sort of resettle. And then it seems really the only decision that's made is to approach the palace. But in those ways, like,
Venus kind of tells them
right,
to go to the palace.
Right.
Yeah.
And it also seems like the natural thing you would do if you just landed on an island, just like Odysseus did, is like, hey, we got to see if anybody lives here who can help us out or whatever. So I don't actually think that we need at this point to know characters' motivations, because characters haven't made any monumental or consequential decisions at this point. So,
though, can I ask if you have the answer to this question, which is, why is Dido so welcoming? And why does she like straight up just state, like, if you stay here and build this place with me, like, we can own it 50-50?
I'm going to point us to, it's a line 630 in my version. But this is after Aeneas reveals himself, from being invisible to being hotter than ever. And Dido is then welcoming them. So come now, warriors, join me in my house. Fate dragged me through much suffering myself until it let me settle in this land. My own experience has taught compassion. So there she's basically saying, I was in your position similarly, of just kind of like being dragged around by fate. And I was blessed with this opportunity to land in a safe place and to build something. And so I have compassion on you in that same situation. And I want to afford you the same luxuries that now I have been afforded, and to share that.
Okay.
So I do think it is, I too was astounded by Dido's generosity. And I do think that that is remarkable. And that is, I think, one of the noteworthy characteristics of Dido, is that she does seem fairly unselfishly generous and just like, yeah, welcome. All that is mine is yours. And I'm willing to give you not just temporary shelter, but permanent shelter if you would like it. Because she has been in that position herself.
It's also made apparent that Dido is a newly widowed person. And it was like she was married to this one guy, and they were like reasonably happy, but then her brother hatched a plot, killed her husband, and then her dead husband came to her in a vision, a dream, and was like, flee this place, go to the place where I buried some treasure, and you can like build a whole civilization there. Right. That's basically.
Yeah. So she was kind of a refugee off, but with a lot of money, and was fleeing from her brother, who was cruel, and then found this place to build Carthage. And so that's obviously not exactly what is happening to Aeneas. It is similar in that they are both sort of fleeing from a home that was ruined by violence, but the nature of that violence is, in Dido's case, very small and concrete. It was her brother's cruelty versus, an entire war and an army in Aeneas's case. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels that make, I think, Dido feel compassion for Aeneas and his men.
So the second part of this that I'm still a little confused on is Venus hatches a plot with Cupid to make Dido fall in love with Aeneas. And so it's a little bit like, why does she want to make them fall in love, and what is Venus so worried about?
Right. Yeah, because Venus has just had the conversation with Jupiter, where Jupiter has laid out the entire prophecy that they will get to Italy, they will get to Rome, and it will be a great, nation that will rule forever. And so she knows that her son will not ultimately stay in Carthage. And so, yeah, it seems contradictory at first to then why do you want to make him fall in love with the queen of Carthage? That seems to work.
Make her fall in love with him.
Right. Yes, that's a good
specifically.
Point. Yeah. Yeah, it does feel initially contradictory.
Yeah. So it seems like Venus is afraid of what my translation calls the hospitality of Juno, which would be this idea that Aeneas is going to stop here on his journey and he's not going to reach his full potential by going leaving this place eventually and founding Rome in Italy.
Because Dido has been so generous and her offer is so naturally tempting, like they've been journeying for 7 years and now there's just a place where it's like, yeah, you can just stay as long as you want, forever if you want.
Yeah. And so I think Venus thinks by making Dido fall in love with Aeneas, she has a sort of she has dominion over her emotions by making the primary emotion that she feels be love, which is like her thing. Then she can't be manipulated by a different god.
Right. Or the sort of feelings of compassion and generosity that sort of like love and lust are kind of more powerful and easily controlled by Venus than Dido kind of being just like a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of Venus saying like, I want to corrupt Dido so that I can control her.
Yeah.
But I'm going to corrupt her with love. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like this is one of those things, this is like an obsession thing where it's like, when you curse someone to like love so much, it's like not a good thing. Yeah, it's like the passions are out of whack, and that always leads to bad things.
Yeah, and so I think that's why it's confusing, is because on the surface level, you're like, wait, if they fall in love, then that gives Aeneas even more reason to stay. But if we think about falling in love as this kind of like weapon from Venus, that can turn into obsession and lust and all these other negative sides of love, then it's more easy to see how that can be manipulated to work against Aeneas, which is ultimately, from Venus's perspective, in favor of Aeneas because she wants Aeneas to leave. She doesn't want Aeneas to stay because he is fated to go on to bigger and better things than simply staying in Carthage and being with or under Dido's command.
Yeah. This is also making me realize maybe a difference between sort of a Roman understanding of mythology and a Greek understanding of mythology, because we honestly didn't get very much of like Venus and Venus's powers in Homer's poems.
Right. I think the only time she came up as Aphrodite in that context was when Aeneas was fighting Diomedes, I believe it was, in very early on in the Iliad, like book 5 or 6. And Aeneas had been shot and Aphrodite, Venus, came in and sort of like whisked him away, and that made some of the other gods mad. It's like, wait, if we can all just go in and just like rescue our children, then like this war has no point.
Yeah. I think she also talks to not Priam, the other Paris.
Yes.
She also, because Paris is also her son.
Yeah.
So she also has an interaction with him, but she doesn't. We've never seen her use her powers of love specifically to do things. Yeah,
and actually there were a couple different moments where the Aeneid felt very Shakespearean, or I guess Shakespeare in retrospect feels very Virgilian, where the moment of those kinds of things felt very similar to A Midsummer Night's Dream,
for sure.
With sort of like, Cupid, you should go and get this love potion and do this thing, and then I will be able to manipulate the people who are head over heels in love. And then also at the very beginning, when Aeolus had sort of called up the storm and everybody was just kind of like panicking, that also felt oddly similar to the beginning of The Tempest.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I have no idea whether Shakespeare was directly inspired by these moments, but it feels like Shakespeare is drawing on, again, similar themes and questions that we understand to be kind of universal and transcendent, and that all of these stories are kind of tapping into.
Yeah. I think pretty much for sure, whoever Shakespeare was, they were reading this.
Yeah.
I feel like that's pretty for sure.
Yeah.
But either way, it does kind of mark a shift in how people see the gods and like what powers they have. Because it's different than Athena coming down and knocking arrows out of Odysseus' way, which is it's still a very physical way of interacting with the mortal characters, but it's instead like thinking about like the gods each having their own like more magic powers, as opposed to just an ability to be a god and like appear anywhere and do things.
Yeah.
It's more like specific. Like Venus has this love power and she can use it to throw things out of whack.
Right. And we
you
saw
know?
Aeolus had wind power and Neptune had sea power.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so obviously like there is an extent to which that was true in the Homeric Greek understanding,
Mhm.
but it does feel more concrete, like magic spell kind of system that we're more used to in the modern day.
Yeah.
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 The other thing I find interesting too, as I don't know if this is majorly significant, but
Mhm.
Venus's plan is for Cupid to disguise himself as Aeneas's son and to be all like cute and cuddly. And so Dido's like, oh, she'll like drag you up on her lap and she'll shower you with kisses because you're so beautiful and childlike and
Mhm.
wonderful. And then you can like breathe poison onto her
Mhm.
and corrupt her. But like even that is strange of like disguise yourself as Aeneas's son. I don't know. I just found it an interesting mechanism for the scheme to play out with.
Yeah, it still has this element of, it feels more like, again, like a magic spell.
Mhm.
It has this element of like, you got to go down there and breathe on her.
Yeah.
You know, Venus can't just stand, you know, from wherever
Mhm.
and like, ooh, do it. Like,
Yeah.
from it. Yeah. It has this,
There's like rules to it.
yeah, it has this, yeah, has a different concrete feeling to it.
Yeah.
But we're going to get back to that later because the next few books, I don't know exactly how many, but the next few are going to be Aeneas telling how Troy fell.
Yes. And then the 7 years up to that. So book 2 will be the fall of Troy and then subsequently their journey that eventually, yeah, will get back to Dido and then eventually they will leave Carthage.
Yeah.
But, right. So we are set up just like we were in the Odyssey of knowing that there has been much suffering and we're about to hear that. And I think it's also important, just like Odysseus was sort of aware of his sufferings and of his, I guess, like cruel fate. Aeneas also is
Mhm.
similarly sort of self-aware about his fate because, right, we talked about the very first lines we hear from Aeneas are on the ship when he's kind of despairing of like, would that I had died in Troy, glorious, you know, but now I'm going to die on the sea. But then when they land and they're safe, he's like, oh, okay, it's fine. And so the first line he says to his companions that is more hopeful is going to be our first Latin time of this season of Winnow. So I think we mentioned in our episode 0, neither of us are as familiar with Latin from formal studies. I took 2 years in high school, but Latin is, I think, even easier than Greek, particularly for our uses in terms of cognates. They're just like, I was just looking at some lines and I was like, oh yeah, like I don't even need to look this up in the dictionary because there's just so many cognates in this. So I'm going to read line 198 in the Rudin translation. Sarah Rudin translates it as, friends, we are all at home with suffering. And the Latin begins, O socii, SOCII, which is friends, social, so that makes sense. Neque, which is a negation, and then a ignari, which is ignorant. So we are not ignorant. So there's a double negative happening here. So we are not ignorant. Well, then there's sumus, which is the verb of to be, we are. So we are not ignorant. Ante. Did you know that ante is Latin for before? Like when you ante up in poker, that's you do what before you start betting. So we are not ignorant before malorum, which is evil, suffering, bad things. And it's also, this is not related to the Aeneid, but as a fun fact, the reason that we in the modern day culturally tell the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden eating the apple is because malum in Latin is both evil and apple. And I think there was one translation of the Bible into Latin that somehow something got mixed up. And yeah, so there's the reason the fruit of evil then became just like the apple fruit. And then that then solidified itself in our heads as the apple in the tree, when actually it was just the word for evil. Regardless, right, we see this idea that was present very much in Odysseus's character as well, that like we are used to this. We saw as an epithet for Odysseus, long-suffering Odysseus, and this seems very similar. Friends, we are all at home with suffering, or the more literal, like we are not ignorant of suffering. or we are not ignorant in the face of evil, or something like that, which I think lends to just the kind of grittiness of this, that just like we admire Odysseus in some ways for his just like, I've been through this before and I can get through it again. We see that same quality in Aeneas, and also now his willingness to share that with others. And I think maybe that's another aspect that I want to pay attention to, is the way in which Aeneas interacts with his crew differently than Odysseus did, because obviously the way Odysseus interacted with his crew didn't work out for him. He ended up alone, but Aeneas does not end up alone. And so the social aspects of Aeneas's leadership seem to be really important here, that he begins that with like friends. The camaraderie is really present. And I'll be curious to see how those two go together, the friendship and the suffering, and how they weather that, different from Odysseus and his crew as they poorly weathered their own suffering.
It's also interesting because Aeneas gets the epithet of like pious Aeneas like multiple times throughout this book. And it definitely seems like Aeneas is supposed to be an example of what a pious and good leader, an example at the time of what a pious and good leader should be. So yeah, it definitely seems like paying attention to his actions in terms of his leadership abilities will be interesting. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned that, though, I remembered Sarah Rudin in her translator's note actually talks about avoiding the word pious, even though it's very commonly used for Aeneas, because she thinks it has nowadays too many Christian connotations, and she didn't want it to just feel like we were importing Christian values of piety onto Aeneas. But none of that stood out to me then, because there wasn't a commonly repeated word. Sarah Rudin, just like Emily Wilson, is intentional about often varying her epithets. Even if it's the same word in Latin every time, she wants it to sort of change for variety and to fit the context of the line, and oftentimes the meter of the line as well. But that means, I didn't pick up on that, and you're mentioning it made me remember that she actually said on her translator's note that she like didn't want to use that. Which I don't know if I agree with, but whatever.
But it is interesting that I do agree that how Virgil is using pious is, we can't just import our understanding of pious here and now and like import that back into it, because it doesn't have exactly the same, or it doesn't have any of the same religious connotations. It would have been interesting to maybe do some research and be like, and have like this nice definition of what the contemporary view of piety at this time was, or what view of it they were trying to sort of put forth to the people. But I do think that if you are a attentive reader, like as we read this book, I do think that if we just pay attention, we should be able to come up with our own definition of what Virgil is trying to push as piety as we go forth. In a lot of ways, I've been thinking about the idea that when you read the Odyssey, you don't need to know what polytropos means when you start reading the Odyssey, because the rest of the Odyssey is all about what does the word, it's a definition for what is polytropos.
Yeah, I think I saw somebody on the internet when people were arguing about different translations of polytropos. Is like, actually the best translation of polytropos is the rest of the Odyssey.
But yeah, just like the Odyssey is just basically a long definition of what polytropos means. I think we could treat the Aeneid as an exploration of the same thing, but with the word piety. We should read this book, and then we should be able to have an understanding of what Virgil thought piety was.
Yeah. And we already get a little bit of a hint where when Aeneas is kind of introducing himself to Dido, he's like, we brought our household gods with us from Troy. Like, we were able to escape. And I do remember very specifically from the first time I read this in book 2. Book 2 is incredible because it is the depiction of the fall of Troy. And there are moments where Aeneas is prioritizing like bringing with him statues and other like relics that seem important to him. So I will pay attention, and if you're reading along, you should pay attention to as well to when they're escaping Troy, what do they bring with them besides just their own lives, because Aeneas seems very intentional here about like making it clear that they brought with them physical reminders of their religion and their piety and their gods and all that.
And interesting also to think about how Christopher Nolan portrays.
Yes.
Because he's got extensive scenes where we get to see a visual for that fall of Troy.
Mm-hmm.
And even in Nolan's version, it's not a triumphant fall of Troy. Like
right.
Odysseus is like having an existential crisis as it's happening, so it is in a sense we get to see it through it like the Trojan's eyes in his movie because it's not triumphant. But it'll be, so I'm going to at least be thinking of Nolan's portrayal of the fall of Troy while I read this.
Yes.
And be thinking about maybe things there.
Yes, because I believe like even the character Sinon, who was in Nolan's movie, was not a character at all in either the Iliad or the Odyssey, but I believe, if I remember correctly, is a character in Virgil's telling of the fall of Troy.
Yeah. For sure.
So
I've heard the same.
We shall look forward to that. I actually very clearly, I think it was our friend Abdullah, who the first time he read book 2, shout out to Abdullah, just like came up to me. It was just like, I just wept the entire time I read that because the poetry is just so beautiful and so heart-wrenching. And I do remember it being incredibly emotionally gripping and riveting. So I'm very excited to reread book 2. And but as a reminder, go ahead.
Just as a reminder, you're not going to get another episode from us for a month. We're now posting on the first Friday of every month. So you will not be hearing from us again until September 4th.
But that will give us time to digest, gives me time to start a new job, for which I'm very excited, but also for which I know I will have many responsibilities and not as much time to dedicate to Virgil. But that's okay. We will still find time. Yeah. We will still...
And we will, for sure, if something comes up in popular culture that we have to talk about.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure, like, we don't really plan our bonus episodes, our, like, surprise bonus content, but it just happens, especially when we have no other outlet for it.
Bonus episode about Spider-Man Brand New Day? No.
Yeah, for sure. No, not right now. Okay. Until next time.
Happy reading.